Georgia, it can't be overstated how important it was to the Democrats, both in the presidential election as well as in retaking control of the Senate. And importantly, it was also, just from a Democratic point of view, like small d Democratic, it was an amazing time in Georgia this last year. Lots of people voted that hadn't before. And they did so in large part because regulations were changed to encourage voting, to make it easier to fight back against some of the rampant voter suppression that Georgia has sort of been ground zero for a number of years. There was an announcement this last year by Brad Raffensperger, Georgia's GOP Secretary of State, that said Georgia was the first state in the country to implement the trifecta of automatic voter registration, at least 16 days of early voting, and no excuse absentee voting. And perhaps as a result of that, you had 1.3 million people voting by mail in the 2020 general election, and 5 million of the state's 7.6 million voters were automatically registered at the Georgia Department of Driver Services. So they changed the rules to make it easier to vote. Lots of people voted, and that can't be allowed. So now the Republicans are fighting back against it. On Monday, the first day of Black History Month, interestingly, Republicans in the state Senate introduced 9 bills to restrict access to the ballot, including eliminating automatic voter registration, no excuse absentee voting, mail ballot drop boxes, as well as prohibiting third-party groups from sending mail ballot applications, and banning people who moved to Georgia after the general election from voting in runoff elections. So it was nice while it lasted, unless this is stopped. What do you all think about this?
Well, I mean, you know what this reminds me a lot of? The way that zealoty anti-abortion proponents have tried to restrict abortion rights, in that people who are anti-democracy, anti-democratic, small d, are kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall here and seeing what will stick. We know that not all of these laws will go into effect because some of them will be, challenged in court and some of them will die in court. But I think a lot of these are going to make it to a Supreme Court that has a demonstrated track record of being hostile to voting rights. So some of these are going to be declared constitutional eventually, even though some of these are going to be struck down and die in the courts. So my big concern is not just what's going to happen in 22, but what's going to happen moving forward in our democracy. Now that Republicans have placed conservatives at all levels of the federal court system, including the Supreme Court, I'm really concerned that a lot of the more crazy laws that they're proposing are actually going to stick.
Yeah, so the guy who's orchestrating and in charge of taking basically Democratic voters off the rolls and making it harder for Democrats to vote, and in the case of Georgia and many places in America, that also means making sure that as little African Americans vote as possible, deny them the right to vote as much as possible. That is not anything new in Georgia. In fact, the guy leading it, Barry Fleming, is the only guy who led a program that the Supreme Court, the deeply conservative Supreme Court, basically said it's okay to monitor him because he's trouble. So let me explain that a little bit better. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 said there's a number of states where they have to get permission to change their laws on voting because historically they have used those laws against African Americans illegally and unconstitutionally to make sure that they couldn't vote, and that's unacceptable. That was the Voting Rights Act, okay? And then the Supreme Court recently, the conservative Supreme Court, rolled that back and said they don't need permission ahead of time. They can go ahead and discriminate all they like, but if it could be proven afterwards that they really don't want black people to vote, then we'll come in and say it's okay. Then you could actually have some regulation of that particular area. And Barry Fleming was the one guy in the one area where they said, oh yeah, no, that's really bad. What he did to African Americans in that jurisdiction was horrible. And he blocked about 20% of the electorate from voting. They were almost all African American. So Georgia Republicans, who Donald Trump and his fans did not find sufficiently right wing, those same guys, the so-called rhinos and sellouts, nothing of the sort. They're maniacally right wing. They come in and go, oh, let's bring that deeply racist guy who's been sanctioned and have him in charge of blocking as many African American and Democratic voters in Georgia as we possibly can. So that's the Republican Party. But if it wasn't clear enough, I love this quote from Alice Olenek, who is the GOP chair of the Board of Elections in Gwinnett County. She said, I will not let them end this legislative session without changing some of these laws. They don't have to change all of them, but they've got to change the major parts of them so that we at least have a shot at winning. Oh, so it's not about voter fraud. It's about you being able to win. And the way you win is by blocking black voters and other people who might vote for Democrats. In other words, you guys are liars and cheaters. Thank you for accidentally admitting it.
Yeah, and like I don't think people will need to be reminded, but a lot of the people who are putting forward these bills supported efforts to nullify or flip the outcome of Georgia's election. So yeah, no, it's all motivated reasoning. It's motivated legislating, basically. We don't like the result, and we have such a loosey-goosey attachment to democracy that we'll make it whatever it needs to be for us to win, because the alternative is like changing our platform a little bit or getting with the times or something like that, and that we're not fans of that. And so they're doing this, and it's not just them, by the way. Let's take a look at this. This is a map. Ari Berman shared this on Twitter. These are bills that would restrict access to voting. So far this year, in 28 different states, 106 bills, 3 times as high as last year, which makes this year sound bad, but also doesn't speak too highly of last year, because they were also passing a lot of bills to make voting more difficult there. And if you look at that, you're gonna see basically like all of the states that they lost this time that they desperately needed to win, they're gonna try to make it much harder to vote. And the important thing is that we not allow our sort of temporary ecstasy at having won these elections. And we're all excited about the activists and Stacey Abrams and all that got this done and fought for voting rights. Well, but it's not done. Like, we don't have awesome access to voting forever. The work needs to continue. These organizations and individuals still need to be supported. And you can bet I don't know what I'm allowed to say here. You can bet your ass, I think you can say that the Republicans are going to be continuing this crusade against democracy into the midterms and beyond. And we have to be just as vigilant as they are aggressive in pursuing an effective end to democracy.
And one thing I do want to add is that when I take a look at attempts to make it more difficult to vote without showing up in person, one thing that I think kind of gets lost in this is that directly makes it harder for women to vote also, especially women of color, because a lot of times women who are voting also have caretaker responsibilities. The election day isn't a federal holiday. Sometimes it's hard for people to take off work, figure out someone to take care of their kids. This is something that can be construed as an attack also on women, specifically women of color who want to vote, but maybe it's not as easy for them.
Yeah, in Arizona, the Republicans have introduced at least 34 bills. That's just in one state to take away voter rights. They want to wipe out hundreds of thousands of voters from the voter rolls, and they want to end mail-in balloting for 3.2 million people in Arizona. They don't want you to vote, and it's very clear. It's not just that they don't want Democrats to vote. They are trying to limit voting rights across the board, specifically mostly towards African Americans, and obviously they're trying to do their best in targeting Democrats overall. But the main drive is just we want less people to vote. Republicans do a great job of doing voter turnout. We always turn out. For the mythical, magical abortion issue that Republicans are never going to do anything about because they want us to just keep turning out for that. So we do voter turnout amazing, right? So for everyone else, we just want to make sure you don't vote, don't vote. We hate democracy. We invaded the Capitol and tried to end democracy through violence. What part of we hate democracy did you not understand, right? And so look, I have a controversial opinion on this. Which is that I think the blue states should do whatever the red states do. So if they block, Democratic areas from voting by limiting, for example, voting booths, I do the same exact thing in blue states, only to Republican areas. So, like Maricopa counties, they've greatly reduced the number of voting booths because they think it's more Democratic. Okay, great. Wherever I have Democratic legislatures and governors, I would go in and say, look at that, a huge Kevin McCarthy's district is in California. There would be nary a voting booth in his district in the Republican areas if I was in charge. And why? Do I like that? Is that fair? No, I would do that until what the Republicans would do? They'd do hearings, they'd get all over TV, they'd cry and cry, they took away our voting booths. They won't let us vote. Okay, great. Now let's go sit down at the negotiation table. Let's talk about what you're trying to do in Georgia and Arizona. Because if you want to cry about it, well, let's talk it through and talk about how evil you are and how much you hate democracy and how I can prove it in other states. But if you don't fight back, all there is Democratic complaining without actually doing anything about it.
I mean, you bring up Arizona, and I think that's really interesting because Arizona, for the first time since I can remember, has 2 Democrats representing it in the Senate. One of the major blocks between the Senate, the federal government, and passing a law that would provide federal protections to voting access is Senator Sinema, one of Arizona's senators, who is against eliminating the filibuster. If Democrats could eliminate the filibuster, they could pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and they could actually enshrine at the federal level access to voting that is fair for people across the country. But it's one of those like brain-bendingly stupid political moves that one of Arizona's senators is endangering her political future and her party's political future for ? I don't know.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.